The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Insights. I'm Aaron Parsegian and I'm joined this morning by ACC Professor of Political Science, Tim Kuhnlein. Tim, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And so we're going to get right into it. Nationally speaking, Election Day was a couple weeks ago. The pundits weren't expecting this, polls weren't expecting this. Donald Trump came out the victor. Is that something you saw coming?
No, although I had a bet a while ago that he could potentially win this thing, and no one really believed it, but I won the bet. So, yeah, that was a real shocker, I think, for everyone, including the campaign. But I think it's an indication of where we are. When you think about the polls, and they're going to assess the science behind that, but obviously this is a very close election, one of the closest in history. I mean, we're talking about 0.1%, not only in the national popular election, but within those states that ultimately determined the Electoral College outcome. We're talking razor thin, I mean, not in every instance, from Pennsylvania to Michigan to Wisconsin, they're razor thin margins of victory, less than 0.1%.
And they're always saying, the presidential candidate, it's hard to win unless you win these battleground states like Florida, Ohio. And as the numbers were coming in, it was Trump wins Florida, Trump wins Ohio. And that's not many people expected to win both, let alone one.
Or all three.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, most of the attention was on Florida and North Carolina. But clearly that, I think it's just a sign of where we are. There are a lot of people really struggling. And we can talk about the social issues of our society and people feeling that their day is due, for equal rights and whatnot. But at the same time, I think people are also struggling with their economic situation. And it's no surprise. We have the largest discrepancies of wealth in the history of our country right now. And Donald Trump was able to tap into that. And he did it in a way that I think most people weren't seeing. And therefore, the polls kind of also, and the commentaries kind of missed that boat. So it was a reckoning, and it shouldn't surprise us in the scheme of things. People really need something to change, and the question is, can he make it happen?
And looking back to 2015 when this whole campaign kind of got kicked off, everyone's been following, for that long. He was running his campaign like no other candidate has before. Is very loud, vocal, out there, not spending a lot of money. And have you seen something like that, or?
Well, there's no question it was downright vulgar. And of course, both sides engaged in probably one of the most shallow exchanges that we've seen in relatively modern history. But this is also nothing new for politics in the United States. I mean, you go back to the early 1800s and the formation of this country, and they were very nasty to one another. I mean, there's this famous example of Thomas Jefferson accusing John Adams of being a hermaphrodite to discredit his, character, and compare that to what we talk about today, and you can be your own judge. And of course, Jackson's wife was a slut, and so things were nasty, and they played those kinds of politics. I mean, a vice president killed a secretary of the Treasury, the famous Burr-Hamilton duel. So things were nasty, but I think we thought we moved forward from that sort of thing, and this was really kind of a much more shallow exchange in many respects.
And so he was officially elected. He won the majority electoral votes, but didn't win the popular vote. So a lot of people are talking now, should we abolish the Electoral College? Some people are trying to make a movement for that. And what do you think about something like that?
Well, first of all, it's almost inconceivable. It would require a constitutional amendment, which would be a laborious process. Plus, you'd eliminate 3/4 of the second article of the Constitution. The irony of this is how much emphasis we're putting on the presidency and the executive branch in the first place. Our founders never intended this. And one of the reasons they put the Electoral College in there is to try to temper not only the power of this person, but the way in which this person is ultimately elected. And I think the gap we're missing is that it's turned into a purely numerical formula instead of a deliberative formula, and it was originally intended to be about deliberation. And the Electoral College has not met yet, so it has not solidified the decision of the popular vote. Not that it's likely to change, because we've allowed this to become a mathematical formula rather than a deliberative one. Could some change occur? I think you're going to see a lot more pressure from states like Maine and Nebraska, who have proportional translation of the popular will into how the electoral votes in their state are distributed. There's probably going to be some push in that direction, but to what extent it will fundamentally change the way we engage presidential elections, probably not likely in our immediate lifetime. If it was going to happen, it would have happened back in 2000, I think.
Yeah, I was reading something. It was fascinating. It was that these electors that actually vote on the election, they could make a mistake where they spell someone's name wrong and it's counted as a vote, but in recent past, no one's ever gone against how the people voted or the electoral.
Well, there are instances. They're few and far between, and where someone does change their mind, it's one vote, so it's probably not going to change. Even in this scenario, it wouldn't change the outcome of the election. But this is also very interesting how the parties, which are nowhere defined in any of our founding documents, have an iron fist grip on the process. And they define these the electors are partisans who have been determined during the national conventions of each of the parties, and they're just following what is perceived to be the popular vote, the popular will, but it's a much more complicated story than that. Perhaps someday we can have a deeper discussion about that.
Definitely, and as the popular vote went, it ended up Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote, which was similar to what we saw in 2000, where the Democrat candidate won the popular but didn't win the electoral.
Of course, we break this down state by state so that you empower states, particularly the smaller states, to have what is perceived to be an equal share of influence in the Electoral College process. The problem that's not happening is that deliberative exercise is not engaged. And it used to be when the country was first created, we didn't even have the candidate's name on the ballot. You were electing the elector on the ballot. We still do that officially, but we show the candidate's name. And historically speaking, you were voting for the elector with the trust that they were going to be the type of person that could have a reasonable deliberation about how Michigan's votes would ultimately be cast. And they didn't all have to go in one direction either. Today it's winner take all, and the fact of the matter is, no one got a majority in any of these races, not a majority at all. These are all minority victories. And in France, for example, their presidential election requires a 51% majority. So we would have had to have a second election, a runoff between the top two vote getters. Well, that and if this were based on popular vote. But my point is that the Electoral College process, it appears to be based on majority, but it really isn't. It's a plurality.
And I think a fascinating point you brought up is people are putting so much emphasis on the presidential election when in reality the Republicans, who are obviously joyous after the election, they won the House, they won the Senate, so they have total control in Washington.
I think it's one of the most, the emphasis that we're placing on the presidency is one of the most tragic things of the contemporary American discourse. Put the parties aside, put this election aside. We are perpetually investing our energies and our attention into one person, regardless of who it was. And if it's your guy, you're excited. If it's not your guy, you're terrified. This is not healthy. This is not what our founders intended. And when you couple that with all of the social dynamics and the economic dynamics, we really have a reckoning to do to get our attention back to the first article of the Constitution, and that is Congress. You didn't hear a word about it in this entire election process.
No, it was all focused on the executive office.
It was really disturbing. As someone who's trying to watch this stuff from a more objective historical perspective and a structural perspective in terms of how the system was intended to function, we've drifted a long way. And the question is, will we drift even farther now, especially with one-party domination and with the type of persona that a Trump figure represents, although it probably wouldn't have been all that different with a Clinton presidency, because this is bipartisan, this consolidation of power. Unfortunately, we've allowed it to become kind of a zero-sum game dynamic as well, and we've got a lot of reckoning to do in this sense if we think we're really going to solve some of these problems and get everybody on a similar page.
All right, well, we're going to continue this conversation. We just have to take a quick break, so join us because there's more insights coming after the break.